Musical Talk, the UK's independent musical theatre podcast. Hello and welcome to another edition of Musical Talk. I'm Thos Ribbits and I've never been terrorised by any of my kitchen equipment. And if that doesn't mean very much to you, I'm guessing you don't know the musical Caroline or Change. Well, I'm hoping today's episode will see that situation change for you, because Caroline or Change is a fantastic musical and one you could have seen recently in London's West End in 2018. But the show has a much longer history than that. It was written by Jeanine Tesori and Tony Kushner and was originally workshopped in 1992. Before, over a long period of development, it eventually came to the theatre in 2003, which is when it formally premiered off-Broadway, before transferring to Broadway itself at the Eugene O'Neill Theatre in 2004. It's been to London twice, once at the National Theatre in 2006, and then more recently at the Chichester Festival in 2017, which is the production which then came to London, first to the Hampstead Theatre and then to the Playhouse Theatre in the West End, where it ran between 2018 and 2019. And it was there that I got to see it, with Tim Sayward of This Parish, but not with Colin Molloy, who saw it independently. But as we had both seen it, we were then able to discuss it. And so today you're going to hear the last third of that lengthy and charming conversation I had with Colin about three shows. You've already heard our conversation about 42nd Street and Porgy and Bess. And so to finish it, here is our conversation about Caroline or Change. Musical Talk, the UK's independent musical theatre podcast. Should we move on to the next one?
Yeah. I figured out your working, Thos.
You have indeed, haven't
you? From operatic to operette-ish. Is that where we're going now?
Yes, I think it is. And also, it's another take on the black struggle in America.
Yeah.
Because we're talking about Caroline or Change now.
We are.
Which, once again, we've both seen.
We have.
Just not together.
No, we'll get better at that.
We certainly shall. Gosh, an interesting piece, I think, Caroline or Change. 2003 in origin, I think, in America. Came to London about 10 years ago at the Royal National Theatre.
Yep.
Currently on at the Playhouse. I think it's the Chichester performance
which
production.
transferred to the Hampstead.
Yeah, and then on to the Playhouse. Quite rightly so. I didn't really know it. I knew of it. So I came to it fresh.
Yeah.
Tim Sayward, once again, is the person I went to see it with, raved about it in advance, so he was looking forward very much to seeing it. Do you want briefly to describe the story?
Sure. Well, it's set in... Am I right in thinking it's set in the 1960s?
1963.
1963, thank you. And concerns a middle-class American household, primarily their maid, or what they would call the help, who is a woman called Caroline, played brilliantly by Sharon D. Clarke, which I'm sure we'll get to.
Gosh, yes. Oh, I mean, one of the performances of the year already, I would say.
And it concerns her struggle, or it concerns interactions with the people around her, primarily the family, primarily the young boy of the family.
Noah.
Yes, Noah, who I believe is a variation on Tony Kushner, who said he has based this... who said Caroline or Change is based on his upbringing.
He's one of the writers, isn't he?
Yes, who wrote the book. And it concerns that interaction primarily as she carries on through her struggle, which is partly based around her race and partly based around the lack of social mobility from doing a job as such. But she's not put upon by herself. She's very
she's
a hard yeah, she is.
Gosh, yes.
She's a hard worker, and the show does well to reflect that. And I mean, what I found what I wasn't expecting from seeing this, I knew going into it that it was operetta light of some kind.
Motown operetta light.
Yeah, which is a nice... I mean, I'm not a fan of fusion, but it's a nice kind of fusion. It's interesting, at least.
It was certainly palatable to my ears, and it's not my kind of music at all.
Sure.
I had no trouble with that at all. And I thought the music and the lyrics worked very well together as well, so, it worked coherently.
Yeah. What surprised me is very portrait-esque. It's very... there are lots of vignettes rather than a scene or a through narrative, which initially I mean, by the interval, it was clear that what we were watching wasn't so much a feeler, or we weren't being pulled into a story. We were actually, which isn't surprising given it's written by Tony Kushner, who is a big Brecht fan, and given the devices that we use, such as a singing washing machine,
indeed,
or very, very two-dimensional characters, such as, I mean, despite how well the mum and the dad were played, they are played with lack of sincerity. They are played with a surface level, these are our tropes, and this is how we interact with this character, which gives us the objectivity to look at what that relationship is, rather than...
It reduces it to the bare bones of the mechanics,
absolutely,
rather than the personalities that might be driving those mechanics.
Yeah.
Yes, absolutely.
And I think even though we've got a rich history in musical theatre, that's not been explored a great deal. I don't think I can even really think of a musical that does something similar to that. So by the interval, I wasn't surprised that the people who I know who had seen it, especially those who even at the end didn't like it, found it difficult to care for the characters. I think it's a show... Yeah, I think it's a show that's designed, especially in the first half at least, it's requiring you to get used to the rhythm of the character. It's designed for you to get used to the monotony that Caroline goes through.
There's a diurnal round, isn't there? Very much so. Day in, day out. This is what happens,
I think it's very boring, but by nature, it's rather than show you how boring it is for Caroline, why not make you feel bored as well? By proxy of, eventually helping you emote with her.
Well, it's a soap opera in a way, in that sense. I don't mean literally because there's a washing machine. I mean, but it's a soap opera in the sense that you're right. The day in and day out of everyone's lives is regular and routine in many, many ways. And so very much is the case here, not just because of the diurnal round, but because of the social strata being so stratified, so unable to move, and generationally as well.
And it also doesn't feel like it's progressing chronologically. It does feel very much like we're seeing images of a fixed period of time.
It's a tableau over a period, isn't it?
Absolutely, yeah.
I found this marvellous. So, as my cards are on the table, I thought it was terrific, and I'd happily see it again. It surprised me in a few ways, but it didn't surprise me in some other ways. And what surprised me more was the people I was with, because it wasn't just Tim, it was a few other people. And in the interval, the big thing that everyone was saying was, I wasn't expecting it to be so, and I quote, weird. And the reason they found it weird was because there was a singing washing machine, a singing dryer,
a singing moon,
a radio, exactly. Now the odd thing is, I just took those in my stride. I just thought, it's figurative theatre, I'll take them. Yeah, I can see what's going on here. These are the elements of each. Caroline works for the most part on her own in the basement of the house.
Yeah.
They're a Jewish family, aren't they? Which also adds an extra level of race interest in the south of America, Louisiana way, kind of wherever it is. But so there's different subtleties of race politics going on. But she is on her own in the basement unless someone comes down to see her, like the wife or Noah, the son.
Yeah.
And even then, they're flying visits for the most part. They don't linger very often. Although there's a kind of friendship between Noah and Caroline, but you don't get the impression they spend hours in each other's company at all. So, and she's a very still character, and I'd like to talk about that in a minute as well. But so everything around her isn't still. So, her life, as it is in that basement, is her having a fag while the radio's on, or while the washing machine's on, or the dryer is on. She's got a slightly different relationship with each of them. In one level, in 1963, a washing machine, which is identified as a new washing machine, I think, is an emancipating piece of equipment for someone who presumably would have done that by hand 20 years beforehand. So, and that's white and pure and clean, that's seen as a positive. There's the devilish dryer. She's very religious, so she does see things in this way because it's old and terrible and does damage, but works. The radio keeps her in touch with the world, which is actually very clever because she lives in this very odd... She has chosen to insularize herself. and the radio plugs in. Isn't just music. There's news, and that plugs into the world that her own children are involved in, and their drive for equality, which she keeps out of. She's not for change, ironically.
Yeah.
So, but I didn't have any. The moon. I thought the moon just was a way of explaining time passing, amongst other things as well. The waxing and waning of the moon suggests both politics and time to me.
Sure. Although I'm sure you admit the bizarrity of those features.
Yes, but once again, and it could just be, forgive me, that I saw 3 very different shows in 30 hours. Because I saw Aladdin in West London, and where a woman sang a song about all the tube stations on the Underground. I was dressed in a tube map. I saw 42nd Street on the Saturday matinee at Theatre Royal Drury Lane, and that evening I saw Caroline or Change.
Right.
So I had 30 hours of every possible theatre option available.
Yeah.
And so having spent the night before in a show, in a pantomime where that kind of thing happens all the time.
Yeah.
I am the genie of the lamp, let's be honest. It's a fairly difficult thing to swallow unless you're trained to know the fairy tales.
Yeah.
I didn't have any trouble at all with the singing washing machine.
Sure.
I just thought it was a figurative way of showing you her solitude, but where her connections were.
Well, it is, and I guess I think what is bizarre about it is we don't tend to get serious musicals depicting serious issues in such a figurative, sometimes absurd way.
And that's true, absurdist perhaps,
but deliberately alienating in that Brechtian kind of way. Yeah.
Now let us talk about the journey that a lot of people we know had, because as I say, they were all saying how weird it was in Act 1, and they were enjoying it, but it was weird, wasn't it? And then at the end of Act 2, gosh, wasn't that moving, everyone said, and you know that from your own circle of friends.
I do, yes.
That how the second act seems not to be a follow-on from the first act. It is narratively, but it isn't emotionally, perhaps.
No.
But on the other hand, so many shows are actually about setting up a context and then throwing in a little hand grenade of drama somehow, and then seeing what happens to get an emotional climax of some variety. So actually the structure is the same.
Yep.
It just seems more surprising to some people that this show, having had its speech marked wacky or weird opening, has its meaningful second half. From your own experiences and from the people you've seen it with, can you describe that dichotomy? And does it seem like a dichotomy, or does it? Because it didn't to me.
No,
it did to some.
The interesting thing to me is I didn't see the dichotomy either. I very much felt like I can see what my friends were saying in that the first half and the second half felt very different, and people preferred the second half. But I can see the function of the first half in that it was setting up a monotony, a routine, and a rhythm that we had to either buy into or be bored by. And hopefully the solution is to buy into the former. But in terms of the writing, there were many similarities I felt from the first to the second act. Musically, Janine Tesori, who wrote the music, was using very much the same motifs.
There's no handbrake turn at all.
No, the song styles are more or less the same. The kind of recitative moments where the parents are talking, the son is talking, singing really, are characterised by chords really that reflect harmonies that are assigned to each character. So that wasn't lost in the second half. I think perhaps what was gained in the second half was perhaps an increased drive of narrative. There was suddenly something was at stake in the second half which wasn't so much at stake in the first half, and it's very much like old Greek plays, or even medieval play. It's a morality musical, I think, rather than a narrative musical. It sets up a routine, and then at some point we come across a problem which disrupts that routine, and it's down for either the protagonist or the surrounding characters to solve it.
Yes. So, right, let me ask you the follow-up question then. Maybe it wouldn't have been the same for us because you and I wanted it as a whole, but say we had taken our friends just to see Act 2. Just Act 2. Do you think they would have had the same emotional responses to it, or does it need Act 1 to set up the rhythm from which the variation is then apparent?
I think it does need Act 1. You need a kind of payoff bought from the initial investment. It's not too dissimilar to shows like Company, which are more accessible to a non-theatre going audience, in that you get these series of vignettes setting up a rhythm, which then, in the second act, there is some kind of payoff there. I mean, Company has no plot, really.
No.
There is essential conceit, which is resolved, or a solution is reached by the end. And I think you get that similarly in Caroline or Change.
It's that tableau thing again, in fact.
Yeah,
isn't it?
absolutely.
The tableaus over a period of time, which somehow give you a kind of drip, 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 which together paints a bigger picture than you might have thought each of those little drips might have been able to create.
Yeah, absolutely. I don't think it would have worked if it was just the second.
Perhaps.
Yeah, absolutely. For sure.
I agree with you as it happens. I think you do need Act 1 to create Act 2, and Act 2 on its own would be, fun enough, it would feel rushed, I suspect. I think you need to have created the time and the place and the space for that to happen. And then there are some interesting directorial choices, I thought, in the production we saw. I mean, bearing in mind, very unsubtly given the title, that it is about the force of change. It is also about small change. You know, it's a punning title.
That's a nice pun. Yeah.
In that, you know, the catalyst for change in the domestic environment, i.e., with the Jewish family and Caroline as their maid, is that Noah doesn't empty out his pockets before he puts his clothes into the wash for Caroline to do, and he often leaves small elements of change in there. And the troubled mother, because she is a second wife, she's come down from New York, I think, and still hankering for a New York life, has married her dead best friend's husband.
Yeah.
And it's not going well, and Noah doesn't accept her as, you know, his new stepmother. And the father is a very weak character indeed. Because you get the sense that the mother doesn't really like having servants. I don't know if she's had it elsewhere, but anyways, it feels like there's some kind of sort of liberal guilt going on there anyway. So she says that in order to teach Noah a lesson, but also to help her maid, any money left in the pockets the maid can keep. And the maid rejects that. You know, I don't need handouts.
Yeah.
But then she slowly does start taking it, and then the issue becomes in Act 2 that a $20 bill is left accidentally in a pair of trousers. And that causes a much bigger issue, which then is how we get the resolution. But there's this change element taking us. But the subtext and not the subtext. You've got change within the house. Right? There's a new mother, who's a new wife. There's change in the house. There's change in the material aspects of the house, in the sense that she's got a washing machine.
Yeah.
And, so you've got that kind of change. Her children represent the next generation, who are looking for equality and change and are prepared to fight for it.
Political change with JFK.
Absolutely, yeah. And then and he gets assassinated, so there's change of personnel, if you like, the leadership. So you've got all the changes that occur there, and then you've got the points of stillness. You know, if there's a word that describes Caroline, it's stoicism. We know that she's not a patsy. We know she's not a pushover. She kicks out her abusive husband.
Yeah.
She gives him one chance to reform, which he then doesn't do, and then she kicks him out. And she's only 40, I think, in the piece. You know, so she's had half-life. She's been on her own for a while. She's raising 2 children. She's not making enough money from the job. So, but she is not prepared. You know, she does not countenance the children's. She wants stability, and she doesn't countenance the children's want of political change. She doesn't really want the mother to make situations which are going to be difficult for her in the house. And then you've got the other character who struck me, I thought, as he's not stoic in any way, but a character who's also unable to change, and that's the father. Noah's father is a very weak character.
Yeah.
We're told in the course of the piece that he's not finished mourning his first wife, so he's unable to change. Why he's married the second one feels like it's convenience for him. It's causing a great deal of unhappiness to the stepmother. But, you know, so she is a force of change, whether she wants to be or not. He is unable to support her in that. He is unable to do anything. He's not even able to move on. And the stagecraft I loved on this is that Caroline simply almost never moves.
Yeah.
She stands in front of her washing machine, which might dance around her, and they're all on concentric circular revolves. But so they're moving all the time. They're dynamic. She stands there having a cigarette, looking into the middle distance, thinking. The father, when he comes in, he's a pretty poor clarinet teacher, not making a great deal of money, very weak man, very unable to stand up to anyone, particularly his in-laws and family. He's weak. I can't get that come across, and he just sort of stands there like a jellyfish, not moving.
Yeah.
When he comes on, he's sort of droopy. and he's barely on anyway, so he's not much of a character in the house. So these are people who can't change, they don't move. All the characters that do embrace change have a vibrancy, and I mean, it's not very clever, but it was interesting to me how there was this sort of movement motif going on in the piece, which I found very striking. And then of course there's the well, tell me, did you think it was obvious, or did you think it was clever? I like the fact that the main stage is the basement, and there is a kind of back shelf, if you like, which is the upstairs of the house where the Jewish family live. And they've got a bedroom on one side, which is Noah's bed, and then, if you like, there's a living room with a television in it and a door on the left-hand side, looking from the stage, looking from the audience. And quite early on, the two halves slide apart from each other to allow an entrance into the basement for various characters like washing machines to wander in. But it also signifies a divide between Noah, who's always in the bed, and his stepmother, who's always coming out the door by the television set.
Yeah.
And then later on, as that relationship changes again, hopefully for the better, but who knows? We see the two sides move back in together. And is that too obvious? Is that like the lies, as in follies, neon sign which you so hated?
I think it was a little bit too much for me. It was too on the nose. It was It was at a point where the strings had been tied up, and we could see Noah and his stepmother reaching some kind of solution, at least through dialogue. I don't think we needed it
shown.
Yeah, and I think it was one or t'other, not both. I would have preferred. Not to say that it was not a great part of the show. I think it just both together wasn't as great as it could have been. What do you make about the climax, or indeed anti-climax, at the end, where Caroline is upset by the $20 bill resolves itself in an argument between Noah and Caroline, who had ostensibly had some kind of friendly relationship, and some terrible things are said in both directions. Quite stunned the audience, I thought, the time I saw it. Caroline essentially withdraws her labour, and I use that phrase particularly because it is a withdrawal of presence. She's a still presence, and then she's no presence. She doesn't do anything active. She does something non-active to show her disdain or displeasure or unhappiness. And then that circumstance lasts for a while, until, as you say, the person who resolves the situation is Caroline. She concludes in church, I think, what she needs to do, and it's in her head what she chooses to do, and then she goes back to work. So, in terms of the Great Rebellion, or a big climax, or, it's not Les Miserables, is it? It's not. She stops going to work, and then she goes back to work, and that is, and that doesn't sound like a great story. But the stillness that she brings of the Stoicism on display in the character and the actress really make that resonate. And I love that stillness as power, which is not what the father has. He doesn't have stillness as power. For sure. I think it takes big arrogance to write a show as such where the emotional gratification is in an action so non-dramatic.
Arrogance, do you think? Or confidence?
Well, both.
Oh, right, okay.
I would say confidence, but I don't know, maybe some people would say arrogance. And I think it's highly effective, and I think sometimes it's what an audience needs, is to be given character redemption, but not in such an overly dramatic way, as in shows like Les Mis, which do their thing well, but sometimes we need a show to do it quietly. We need disquiet sometimes.
Well, funnily enough, I'm thrown immediately into the hands, as so often, of Noel Coward. In his song I Like America, he makes a reference to in the southern states, the wrought iron gates are terribly overwrought. And I like that sense of there being big emotion, but also no emotion. And this has no emotion. It is, of course, contrasted with her politically much more active daughter. And I like, and I use like artistically, in the fact that the daughters are unable to change their mother. The mother is never going to join the struggle for equality.
No.
She's had her struggle. And in fairness, we should say that she was let down by society anyway, not just because of the appalling race laws at the time in that part of America, but also, you know, her husband was a veteran from the Second World War, fought nobly, and then came back to no job. You know, society let down the veterans, and particularly the black veterans. So actually, she and he together went together, had already done their bit for society and been let down. So you can see why. Well, it either puts you in two directions: you just fend for yourself, or you then try and change society. She fends for herself in a stoic kind of a way, and the children want to change society, and those two are never going to see eye to eye. I like the fact that you've got different strands going on, because if you didn't know the piece, as I didn't before I went in, you know change is coming in some way. I mean, the statue of the Confederate soldier is very heavily vandalised at the beginning of the act.
It is.
Act 1, and you think, oh, that's going. You know, if I'm reading this in the way that all other plays go, there'll be some kind of white backlash against black people. Someone will die horribly. Probably in the most terrible way, like a lynching or something like that, you know, we're used to from that period. And then that will galvanise Caroline into joining the struggle for equality. And of course he doesn't do any of that.
No.
And indeed the statue is momentarily mentioned again here and there, and has a significance at the end to the daughter, but it doesn't actually give leverage to the plot. It helps the payoff, but it isn't actually significant. It's almost, you're like being sold a pup. Yeah. Which I think is clever.
I think so too. I don't know where I was going with that, but it's again it comes to that audience expectation and seeing something and thinking it bears significance, and then it not, or it not bearing significance to a character such as Caroline, and sometimes that's hard for an audience to grapple with. We can be very good, or we can be quick to jump on visual symbolism, such as the end tableau where the two parts of the stage conjoin, which I didn't like, perhaps because it did bear such significance, whereas elements such as the statue in various states of
destruction, pieces,
which bears significance to the contextual backdrop of the piece, but doesn't bear significance to the main character.
Yes, I agree with that. I mean, any statue is only a symbolic thing. It's not the person themselves.
No.
It represents what they are perceived to stand for. In this case, a Confederate soldier is, particularly modernised, not perceived to stand for anything that's very positive. But also, the lack of a statue or a damage to a statue is symbolic, and it turns out to be symbolic in the piece. So you're right, it's this symbolic representation of change rather than actual change, although, of course, there is an actual change to the statue. It's not germane to the plot, it's a flavour.
Sure. And I think that's how symbolism should be treated, as flavour rather than as, well, the broad brushstrokes.
A hammer with a message on it.
Well, yeah, quite.
So overall, we think Caroline or Change is a bit of a winner, really.
Oh, very much so, yeah.
But takes a very unusual path to get there.
Yeah, it's... I wouldn't say it's a difficult musical, but it's...
structurally strange, perhaps.
It is, and it doesn't give the audience what they want, which no musical should, really.
Always leave them wanting more.
Absolutely.
Just not more of the same.
Yeah.
Final question then on this, for me at least, is we know people who cried on seeing it. And cried at the end of the second act, not the first act. Bearing in mind that, as we've described it, not much physically happens. You know, the drama is subtle drama, lesser drama, quiet drama, micro drama. Where do you think the emotional outpouring comes from? I mean, I know the answer to this, but I'd like to hear your view.
Well, I think of all the shows that have ever existed, there are quite a few in which not very much happens, and I don't think it's too difficult to keep an audience's attention even when not very much is going on. Beckett does that very well.
Yes.
Albee does that very well, where the real focus is on the characters rather than a plot. And it doesn't take a lot for characters to be trapped within a vortex or a tableau and
or a mindset.
Yeah, and for that rhythm to be exploited to a point where there is some emotional payoff, even if one doesn't need to see a character have a change of heart in order to feel for them. One can feel for a character who's failed to recognise the error of their ways, and I think that's what sometimes one can see in shows, in plays by Beckett and Albee, and to an extent in a show like this, the characters, well, one character changes and then returns to her ways, hopefully for the better.
Yeah,
but
with a new mindset, or at least a new understanding.
Yeah,
yeah.
And I think there's a lot to be gained in that simplicity, rather than a huge denouement and a huge reversal of character doesn't need to be so dramatic as in something like A Christmas Carol, which I saw recently, in which Scrooge's transformation after being visited by 3 visitations from 3 different ghosts is, let's put it bluntly, OTT.
Miraculous, astounding, over the top. Yes, I agree. Yes, quite.
Something like that is quite hard to believe, I think, in 2019, less so in whenever it was 1843 or whatever. And I think sometimes a minute change, or even no change at all, but allowing the audience to have noticed what the change needs to be, and still the character is yet to. Sometimes you need the audience to be further ahead mentally than the character.
Oh, indeed, yeah.
And that's a kind of payoff. That's a reversal in the audience rather than for the protagonist, but it's still a change of some kind. And I think what Caroline or Change does really well is we get such a subtle change. It's not a political change, although there is that stuff going on. It's not justice. It's not redemption of any kind. It's someone taking a breather and then returning to what they've always done, hopefully differently. We're not really told whether that continues in the same vein. We're led to believe that it might well do, or that she's had a realisation of some sort. But I think that's all we need. I don't think we need any more than that.
I think it comes from the actual, from what we experience in real life. There are 2 states. There's status quo, and then there's tumult, which is the change from one status quo to another.
Yeah.
In drama, we emphasise the tumult.
We do. And
we pretend that the arrival at a new status quo is, oh Lord, I'm on my way, I'm heading for the promised land.
Yeah.
That, and somehow you've achieved nirvana, or, whatever it is. And in fact, actually, what you've done is you've changed the step from one status quo, which is a level of stability, to a new status quo, which is a new level of stability.
Yeah.
And that's exactly what's happened here. She's gone from one status quo that she may not have been happy in, or no more than content, or even discontent, but it certainly wasn't so dreadful that it needed to be changed.
Yeah.
A change occurred. She's now in a new status quo. It looks very much like the old status quo. Something has changed.
Yeah.
It's an intellectual or mental response to it, or an emotional response even. But the status quo, the new status quo has arrived, and a new status quo is basically has duration in a way that tumult doesn't. And we had seen duration in the original status quo in Act 1. If there had been Act 3 would have been very similar to Act 1. I assume, because we're just back to a new diurnal round with a new mindset slightly. But that's actually how we change in real life.
It is.
I rarely sing when something strange has happened to me.
So despite being so figurative, it is almost the more realistic of all the 3 shows we've seen.
Yes, actually, it is. Isn't that? Oh gosh, that's really clever. Yeah, that is exactly what it is. It is the one that's most like real life.
Which isn't, well, I don't know, I don't find that surprising with figurative theatre. I think it's more effective in, this is more appealing to my taste, but there is difficulty in trying to suspend disbelief, and the shows that try and do that really have to do quite well. And I think the shows which are knowingly figurative, or know that they are a show, we can eventually suspend our own suspension of disbelief and buy into the
return to belief.
Oh yeah, quite.
Yeah. Which is actually sincerity.
There we are.
So Caroline is the most sincere of the 3 shows we've seen.
And the most realistic.
Certainly. Well, Colm, as always, you've helped me untangle quite a lot there, and I'm extremely grateful to you, particularly for your final flash of genius, which has opened my eyes.
You're so welcome.
Seriously, I look forward to talking with you again about other West End and non-West End jewels as we come upon them. Mm-hmm. But for the time being, thanks very much.
Thank you.
Musical Talk. Well, there we are. That was Colm Meloy and me talking about Caroline or Change, the last of our 3-show conversation where we also looked at Porgy and Bess and 42nd Street. 3 very different shows, but with golden threads running between them. And if you don't know Caroline or Change, as I didn't before I got to see it, I would recommend you give it a whirl. And it's one of those shows I think will be better to see than listening to the score first, although I appreciate there are no alternatives when it's not available. The reason I say that is because, as you will have heard from our conversation, it's so visual in many ways, and it's difficult to get a sense of that stillness and also the full sense of the surrealistic attitudes to, for example, kitchen furniture, other than by seeing it. Overall, the piece is magnificent, I think, in all senses, and has won lots of prizes, and quite right too, including the Tony Award for Best Performance by a Featured Actress in a Musical, that was in 2004, and of course for Outstanding Music by the Drama Desk Award in that same year. In London in 2007, in its first London performance, it won Best New Musical. And then again in 2019, it won the Laurence Olivier Award for Best Actress in a Musical. That was Sharon D. Clarke, who was simply stunning. And as you can tell, I'm a great enthusiast for this show. Not least because it's a truly original musical, looking at a very important subject in a slightly tangential way. It does not underestimate the intelligence of its audience, and that is always to be appreciated if you are that audience. Let's hope that once theatre returns in earnest, there'll be another chance to see Caroline or Change in a future production in London and indeed elsewhere. If you ever get the chance to give it a whirl, try it out. And that, I must tell you, dear listener, is the end of our 699th episode of Musical Talk. Sometimes these statistics just astound me. We started in 2006 and we're still going strong. I do hope that you'll join us next week for a very special episode when we go behind the scenes of Musical Talk to mark our 700th edition. And I do hope that after that you'll continue to join us throughout the year, because even though we're still in lockdown here in Britain as I record this, there's still so much to talk about in the world of musical theatre and, of course, its related musical films, opera, music hall, pantomime and cabaret. Those are the main areas we like to talk about here on Musical Talk, and I hope those are the kind of things that you want to hear about. So I'll stop prattling, wish you farewell at the end of 699 episodes, and hopefully you'll join us again next week for our magnificent 700th episode. Until then, goodbye. This episode of Musical Talk presented by Thos Ribbits and Colm Meloy and edited by Thos Ribbits. Copyright Musical Talk 2021. To find out more about the world of Musical Talk and listen to past episodes, go along to our website www.musicaltalk.co.uk or subscribe to us on iTunes and follow us on Facebook, Instagram and Twitter. And if you want to follow me on Twitter, you can at Musical Talk Thos.
And I think
at Southbank Centre. Please take your seats. The performance will begin in 5 minutes.
we're going to get this for 5 minutes.
So we'll plough on in the traditional way. Should we just say that last sentence again?
What did I say?
It's just your last word was cut out, so...
Oh no. It's like Greek theatre.
Or medieval theatre. It's a morality play. It's either for the protagonist to sort out or for the community to come together.
Yes. Yeah, so I do feel like it's a lot like a morality play in that it's down to the character to sort out this solution, this problem that faces them at some point, or it's down to the surrounding characters to sort it out. Where was I going to go with that?
We were talking about there not being a disparity between Act 1 and Act 2, but all the drama is in Act 2 in that sense.
Yeah. No, I'll leave it there for now.
That's fine. Yeah, damn you, woman. Bring back the incoherent man. No. He'd have just been twice as long. So where was I going to go with that?
Much like shows like Company, which are, I think, more accessible to perhaps a non-theatre going audience. You get these vignettes.
Festival Hall at Southbank Centre. Please take your seats. The performance will begin in 3 minutes.
Company.
I think you do.
Hall at Southbank Centre. Please take your seats.
1 minute.
The performance will begin in 1 minute.
Thank you, madam. So you've got the, in order to try and persuade her son and help her mate.
Festival Hall at Southbank Centre. Please take your seats. The performance is about to begin.
Jolly good, let's see if it is. You're getting sense. Sorry. Happy with that? That was good, I love that.
Great.
And it was nice. Oh,
A
good
nice
conversation.
arc.
Yeah, wasn't it? That was, as I say, an hour and a half between us. Can I get you a drink? And would you like a disguised sausage? That sounds so sinister. I meant a banana, obviously.
What was the? I should probably write down that faux Ira Gershwin line.
Well, I was saying a woman is a sometimes thing, and you said
A sausage in a banana.
a banana
skin.
is a sausage in disguise. So good luck on writing the rest of that. Panto next year.
Yeah. I will have another black coffee, please.